Hello, Roman Jinjihashvili here, and welcome to the part two of Modern Way to Play Gruenfeld Defense. In a part one, which is totally unrelated to part two, because we looked at the different variations, and in the part one I explained that the only downside of playing Gruenfeld Defense with black today is because white has all the choices of countless variations in the original position after black's d5. So white has choices what to play. We already covered some main lines, such as cd, knight takes d5, and e4. But main lines is we call it main because we have to call some lines main. That doesn't mean that this is the best line for white. This is like a most controversial line, but there are other lines, other tries for white to achieve some advantage. Those lines been played by some of the very top players in the world, and we have to be very serious, very careful to make sure we get sufficient counterplay. So now we're going to see some other lines, the rest of the lines. I don't want to call them miscellaneous lines because some people may consider this one of the main lines. So it's just a matter of opinion, but no matter what we think, we have to be prepared to play against this variation, and we have to approach them the most competitive way, because in the Gruenfeld, if you are not very competitive in the opening, you're likely to get very passive and maybe very bad and dangerous positions. So let's look at the rest of the variations of the Gruenfeld defense. And here is Grandmaster Eugene Perelstein.
Hi everyone, Eugene's here, and welcome to the second part of the DVD for Gruenfeld defense. As Roman mentioned, there are still lots and lots of different lines white can throw at you, so you have to be prepared. And we have done an extensive analysis of these lines together with Ripka, and I will show you the top evaluations, and hopefully you'll be able to play them without any problems. So besides c takes d, knight takes d5, white has many other setups. We looked at the Russian variation after knight f3 followed by queen b3, but now let's look at the different line after knight f3, bishop g7, bishop g5. So the main idea is white is simply trying to develop. First of all, he's putting pressure on the f6 knight to make black commit to what he wants to do with the pawn in the center, to either defend it with c6, to play knight e4, and also another idea of the move bishop g5 is actually a simple idea to finish the development after the move e3 and have the bishop out. Of course, there is a sister line, immediate bishop g5. So this is a little bit different and we want to look at it separately, but to keep you informed, the ideas are quite similar for black. So after knight f3, bishop g7, bishop g5. So here we play knight e4, and the idea, of course, it's well known that white cannot win the pawn, because after knight takes d5, knight takes g5. Knight takes g5. Black has very easy move e6. Hitting both of the knights, and now white's in trouble. So that's why in this position, most of the time you're going to see either the move c takes d, and this is what we're going to look at first, or the move bishop to h4. But after c takes d, the following position arises. Knight takes bishop, knight takes, and now this common move e6, hitting the knight, and white usually prefers to play queen d2 over the knight retreat. If knight goes back, then after e takes d, really black has no problems. Just to show you what could happen is, for example, white plays e3, black immediately plays a5 to stop any queenside minority attack after b4, because the position is actually very similar to the Carlsbad pawn structure, where black is going to have the pawns on d5, c6, b7, and white is going to have f2, e3, d4. Except here, without the dark square bishop, white cannot really aim for advantage. And after we play immediate a5, for example, bishop d3, black plays castle, castle, and c6. So of course the plan is to play bishop g4. We can trade the bishop for the knight and obtain a comfortable position without any problems. So let's go back. So that's why white plays queen d2 with the idea to try to keep the knight on g5, hopefully the knight can do some damage. And now we play the move h6, which I think is a much better option than e takes d, because now you have to worry about this queen e3 check and play king f8. And in this particular position, it's still playable for black, but h6 is a much better alternative, because now knight has to move. So after knight f3, again, we get the same type of position as we looked at before, e takes d, and we're not afraid of queen e3 check, because we have bishop e6. So the move that maybe you have to know about is the move knight h3. But in this particular position, pawn takes d5, queen e3 check, king f8. Black is actually not afraid to play king f8, because now we have the little window for our king. And the knight on f3, sorry, on h3 is a little bit misplaced. So to give you an example that even in this position black can play actively and fight for advantage, for example, after the move knight f4, we can play solid with c6, followed by the king march, or we can play active c5. Just to give you an idea, pawn takes c5, d4, really putting pressure, so white has to play queen d2. Notice that black's queen is on d8 unprotected, so we cannot take the knight on c3. But now black can simply play knight a6, and after a3, knight takes c5, sacking the pawn on d4, and white castles long, bishop f5, pawn takes d4, and now black has tremendous compensation for the pawn after the move knight e4. We have the c file, we have the bishop on f5, bishop on g7. The king is really weak on c1, by the way. And so if white takes on e4, after bishop takes e4, white is in serious problems because the move rook c8 is coming up. So really he has nothing better to do than to give up the pawn after bishop d3, queen takes pawn, and so forth. This is very drawish position. So we looked at the move c takes d and showed that white has really no advantage after knight takes on e6. But let us try to look at a different move which actually is a little bit more popular recently than c takes d, the simple move bishop to h4. So notice that white doesn't mind knight takes c3 because he's going to actually build up a very powerful central pawn structure after he plays e3. So these pawns are really going to be like a barrier for the g7 bishop. So after knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, black, if he wants to try to, play for advantage, he should try to take the pawn on c4. Otherwise, what's the point on taking the knight on c3 to begin with? But now white simply plays queen a4 check, so he's going to get back the pawn. By the way, he can also play e3, but now he has to face this move b5, and it's not so easy to prove that the pawn sacrifice is actually worth it. For example, if a4, then c6, and if knight d2, then simply a6. Notice that black is really doing quite well, and it's very unclear how white can try to break up these powerful pawns. And if white simply plays bishop to e2, black finishes up the kingside developmental castle, and if bishop f3, very strong move for rook to a7. As a matter of fact, rook a7 was played back in the day by Garry Kasparov in '97, and he got a winning position against another grandmaster, Sorin from, I believe, from Buenos Aires, from Argentina. So again, rook a7 is just a very good move to avoid a takes b. Rook is no longer on the long diagonal. And if white castles, black simply plays bishop f5 with the idea possibly to play bishop d3 and just gets a comfortable position up a pawn. So white's best move here is queen a4. As I mentioned earlier, e3 is bad because of b5, and black simply holds on to the extra pawn. And after queen d7, queen takes c4, black actually obtains a very comfortable game by simply fianchettoing his light square bishop after the move b6. And notice that it's not so easy for white to play e3 without losing the right to castle, because after e3 we have bishop a6, queen jumps back to b3, bishop takes f1. So now white has to do what is called the manual castle. He has to take on f1 with the king, and then later on he has to play king e2 and get the rook out. And now black simply castles, and after king e2, the simplest way to get a comfortable position is to play knight c6, c5 is also possible, but after knight c6, for example, rook h to d1, black can play knight a5, hitting the queen, and if queen b4, we can play simple move rook f e8, king f1, so white is completing the manual castle. And now black has a very easy and comfortable position. Black can try to play for the for the c5 move, but the move that we like is actually trying to get the knight into the game with the move knight b7, and this is Rybka's favorite too. Simple idea, we're going to prepare, follow it by knight d6, perhaps even knight f5 or knight e4, and depending on what white does, we can try to play for the c5 move later on. So again, black has no weaknesses and very easy and playable position. So this concludes the knight f3 and bishop g5 variation. So we have covered the knight f3 followed by bishop g5 line, but now let us look at its sister line, immediate bishop g5. I think bishop g5 has gained popularity in the few recent years, and if you're playing black, you really have to be well prepared because the positions are usually very complicated and you have to know what to do. So again, we play the same way, knight e4, bishop h4, this is the most common reply, knight takes knight, pawn takes, and here again, just like as the knight f3 line, we take the pawn on c4. So the difference now is white doesn't have to play knight f3. White has several options. One of them is to play e3, followed by trying to attack the c4 pawn and perhaps delaying the knight f3 move, or maybe preparing knight e2 move in the future, depending on what black does, of course. So this position is very complicated, and to really understand all the nuances, I recommend you to go over my analysis very carefully. If you have any questions, you should always consult database, and if you have Rybka, that would be a good option too. And perhaps I would even recommend try to play these positions out just to kind of get a feel for them. So now after e3, black follows up with the move bishop e6, and here white has several options. White, of course, can ignore the pawn and simply develop with the move knight f3. The other move white can play is this very interesting move queen d1 that has been played by top grandmasters. Try to unsettle this pawn on b7, and also potentially queen can come into b4 later on and attack the pawn on c4. Now, besides queen d1, there's also rook b1 with very similar ideas. So first, let us take a look at the move queen b1. And here we play queen to d5. Queen is actually doing quite well. He is keeping an eye on the g2 pawn, and at the same time, we're defending the b7 pawn. So now white has two main moves. We can play knight f3, simply develop, or this tricky move, knight to e2. So knight e2 is tricky because white is trying to play knight f4, and black has to be careful not to get in trouble, not to miss knight a4. So let's look at this first. So after knight e2, immediately black plays bishop f5, hitting the queen, and now white plays knight f4, hitting black's queen. So the position is getting very, very interesting. Now taking on b1, of course, is no good, because after knight takes d5, we have the pawn here hanging with a fork and the bishop on b1 hanging. So black cannot take the queen. Instead, we simply drop back to c6. And now white follows up with d5, another attack of the queen. And now again, very simple move, queen to b6. One thing that you have to know in these types of positions is that the endgame now should favor black. Because after queen takes queen, pawn takes, it seems that as though white is simply getting the pawn back, but it turns out that these two pawns, actually 3 pawns, are all a little bit weak, especially the c3 pawn. And now after bishop g7, white is really having a hard time to finding a good move. If white plays king d2, then after knight d7, if white tries to be aggressive with the move e4, trying to take advantage of the e-file, black has an excellent move here, rook a4, exclam. And this is really bad position already for white. If the bishop retreats, for example, bishop d3, we pick up the pawn. And does white have compensation? I doubt it. If rook h2 e1, we have this very beautiful move, bishop e5. Hitting the knight. And if bishop takes e4, bishop takes knight, check. And black is much better. So here we took a quick look at the tricky move knight e2, and we're not afraid because of bishop b5, sorry, bishop f5. So let's take a look at the more natural development move knight f3. The knight could come back to d2 and also create some problems for the c4 pawn. So now we play knight d7, bishop e2. Notice that white is not in a hurry to win back the pawn, and as a matter of fact, it's not so easy. Now we have another resource, the knight on b6. And after bishop e2, we can play bishop f5. And here black gets a good game. For example, queen b2. Notice that if queen b4, knight b6, a4, black really has no problems after a5. And queen has to retreat. So that's why queen b2. And now black plays bishop to g7. So all of this has been played at the top level game between Aronian and Svidler. So let us take a look at what happened next. White castled, and Svidler plays knight to b6. Again, it's very hard for white to prove compensation for the pawn. The only problem is that black's king is still in the center, but there is no way for white to open up the position. If white plays a4 with the idea to try to attack the knight, Svidler simply plays a5. And Aronian plays knight d2 with the idea to try to put pressure on the queen, potentially with e4 break or bishop f3. Well, in this case, Svidler is solving the problem quite easily. He says, well, I'm going to get back the pawn, but this way you're not going to pester me with the f3 and e4. So after bishop d3, Aronian takes, pawn takes, and here he already makes a mistake. He plays over ambitiously rook f to b1, and he's not going for the pawn. Instead, Aronian could have simply played queen b1, followed by queen takes d3, and with about even game. For example, now queen f5, trying to force white to play f4, e4, and then dropping back to d7 with our queen. We could have played queen d7 actually right away, but it's going to be much tougher for black to attack the d4 pawn because it's defended twice, right? So that's why queen f5, e4, and then queen d7. This is a more nuanced way to play this position. And after queen takes d3, black, of course, can be a little bit ambitious and take the pawn on a4, or simply finish the development with castle. In either case, we can now attack the center, and black stands well. But let us look briefly at the move by Aronian, which I think is a mistake. This rook f to b1. And this is very instructive how Svidler handles this position. He plays queen c6, queen a3, so it seems as though this pawn on e7 is a real nuisance, but Svidler says it's alright, I can give it up after castle. And now, again, Aronian makes another slip. He plays this move c4. For some reason, he has not taken any pawns in this game. Instead, he should have taken with the bishop, and this is about even position, because rook f to e8, if bishop c5, then knight d7, and white has nothing better than to retreat back to e7. But let us take a look what happens after the move c4. Well, Svidler correctly takes the pawn. Again, he is not really afraid of taking material. Knight takes pawn, sorry, knight takes knight, queen takes knight. And now it turns out that, well, black just has way too many pawns extra, and white is not going to have time to pick up all of them. So Aronian takes on e7, and after rook f e8, it turns out that after rook d1, rook a c8, white is facing trouble. Black is just better. And after bishop g5, c5, Svidler went on to win this game in a beautiful fashion. And it only lasted, I believe, few more moves. So this just shows you how dangerous it could get for white to keep sacrificing pawns. And really, there is no compensation to speak of if white tries to play over aggressively like Aronian. So far, we covered the move queen b1, and again, black plays queen d5. And as I showed you, the Svidler game is very instructive against Aronian. But what if white plays rook b1? What does black do now? Well, actually, after rook b1, I want to show you a very, very interesting idea, the move knight d7. So it seems as though black is sacrificing the pawn. In reality, rook takes pawn is not such a good move, and I want to show you why. So if rook takes pawn, black simply ignores it. And black plays a simple development move, bishop g7. So this is actually setting up a very nasty trap. So if white plays the typical move knight e2 with idea to play knight f4, this is already real trouble for white. There is this beautiful idea, knight to c5. And if white takes the knight, this is a study-like position. Black takes, king takes, and now can you find the win in one move? It's simply castle, check. And of course the rook on b7 is lost. So this is really neat trick, and a lot of people actually fall for this, especially in blitz. But what if white doesn't take the knight on c5. Well, in that case, let's say white drops back to b1, knight d3 check, king d2, castle, and this is simply bad position. Look, the king is right in the middle. We're going to attack the pawn structure with the move c5, and white is in serious trouble. So let's go back. So this move, knight d7, is I highly recommend this. And what does white do? Well, taking the pawn again is not such a great idea. Instead, he should play simply knight f3. And of course, black plays knight b6. This is a very thematic idea, knight d7, knight b6. And let's say white just builds up his position. So he's trying to play for the center and better pawn structure. And let's see what could happen. So after bishop g7, bishop e2. So we're actually going to follow a game from top level experts, especially by black. We have Sutovsky, and white will have another Russian, strong Russian player, Tomaszewski. And after queen d7, white castles. Sutovsky plays a very strong idea, queen a4. So notice that black favors any endgames. So white avoids the queen trade. And now with the next move, bishop f5, black secures control of the light squares. So rook b4, queen c6, it's really tough for white to play this position. And Tomaszewski decides to open up the d2 square for the knight with the move queen c1. And here, after the move a5, rook b2, I want to show you a very powerful novelty that we found together with Rybka. And with Rybka's help, I was able to really prove that black is doing quite well on this line. So the move is bishop to e4. Very, very strong move. It paralyzes white on the long diagonal. But the move bishop d3 that was played by Sutovsky is also playable, but it's more aimed for equality rather than advantage. After the move bishop e4, you're paralyzing white's pieces, and if white plays knight e1, you follow up with the move knight d5. And notice that you're not afraid of the move f3 because of the move bishop h6. So all of white's army is paralyzed, and after the move, which is almost forced, bishop f2, bishop f5, it looks as though white has none of the pieces that can move. If queen moves, he can lose the e3 pawn. The bishop from f2 cannot move. Bishop from e2 cannot really move. The knight on e1 and the rook on f1 are really passive. And on top of all that, black has an extra pawn. So this is definitely very, very big advantage. So this is the rook b1 variation.
Okay.
So now we finished looking at both queen b1 and rook b1 moves, and let us focus on the strategy where white simply develops and tries to play for advantage in the opening. So the move knight f3.
Well, this position already happened in several games, and normally everybody plays a bishop g5, but knight f3, when white plays knight f3, they are not in a rush to get back the c4 pawn. They just want to concentrate on getting big advantage in the center and finally develop the attack.
And so this gives us time to build up our advantage, material advantage with the move c6.
And it's very important to protect the b5 pawn, to keep the to protect the c4 pawn, because if white bishop develops to d3, white will have very strong central position. That's why we need to play c6 and eventually protect with b5.
Yep, so that's why white plays bishop e2. By the way, we should mention that knight g5 is nothing to worry about because of the move bishop to d5. And if white plays e4, then we hit the knight with the move h6.
And black has a very good position here, since after ed,
h takes g, white takes on c6, knight takes c6, bishop takes d5, g5, sorry, and now black follows up with a very strong move, centralizing the queen to d5.
not
And
queen a5, bishop d2, or queen d2.
Yeah. So this position actually
After queen d5,
occurred, after queen d5, this position occurred in a few games, and both Ripka and us believe that black has very strong play. For example, h4, bishop h6, and really it's white's king who is in trouble here.
and it's not easy for white to castle, because if bishop moves from f1, that weakens
The
g2 pawn. So black is clearly having advantage here.
Yep. So now let's go back. And we looked at the move knight g5, trying to go for the e6 bishop. But the more natural development move, bishop e2.
And in the game happened bishop g7.
Well, actually first b5, because we want to defend the pawn. A4, and now bishop g7. White castle, black castle. So Roman would like to say a few words about this position.
Well, this position, white has some compensation for a pawn, but I don't think it's sufficient compensation. In the game, it happened knight g5,
Bishop g7,
bishop d7,
sorry, bishop d7, and f4.
and f4. Now, white tries to play e4 and eventually get an attack, but black has no weaknesses, and this attack is very problematic. We think position is better. Overall evaluation is in black's favor. So does Ripka.
Yep.
And in the game, we just make a couple of more moves in the game.
So a5, e4, and now with the move knight a6, preparing knight c7, white plays f5. And now with the next very strong move, black takes over the initiative. f6, knight e6, bishop takes, pawn takes, and the knight is actually quite well placed on c7.
Now, all of a sudden, white has problem with the with e6 pawn, and bishop g4. I don't know. White may be able to play h5, and it's not.
Right, and then followed by g5.
And on bishop h3. Well, g5 may be problematic
Queen takes h5.
because queen takes h5, g takes h, and bishop f5. But notice that
be careful, yeah.
black absolutely doesn't have to do that. And after bishop g4, they can play h5, and on bishop h3, even queen e8, followed by rook d8 and reinstating the g5 threat. Ripka evaluates this position as to black's favor, and we
can actually
her word for it.
even Ripka's recommendation here, immediate b4 to break through on the queen side, and after if pawn takes b4,
f5, and you see the d4.
yeah, as a matter of
After
fact, this is
queen
already
takes
winning for
queen
black,
takes
yeah.
d4, black simply wins a lot of material.
So yeah, we think that this position is better for
Even
black.
after bishop g4, you notice white has knight pawn on e6, which is also weak, and there is no much ways to make progress. Black is doing very well.
So on this note, we are finished with the bishop g5 variation, and there is a lot of complicated positions, but we explained to you in detail black's plans. The analysis is straightforward, and I hope you will be able to win a few good games.
I have to point here that we cannot give every possible variation, exhaust everything. We just pointing to the variations where we have our own opinion that is not very well known. We introduce it to our opinion and give some, actually substantial help from Rivka, and together I think it makes very, very credible evaluation for this variation. I just want to add one little detail in this position after knight e4. White also has c takes d move, temporarily sacrificing the bishop on g5, and after h4 they trapping our knight, and there are several good ways to play for black.
Such
and I
as
think
knight
the
e4,
easiest is knight e4,
knight takes,
queen takes d5. There were some games we don't need to go through this and waste time on that. There are a few games played with it. Black had very good results, and white never achieved any attack. And notice that after knight c3, queen a5, h5, opening the h file, white cannot be successful because they don't have dark square bishop. Bishop on g7 has no opposition, and it's very strong piece, and position is clearly favors black.
So far we have covered knight f3, bishop g5, and its sister line bishop g5. Now let us look at a little bit different bishop move, and this is bishop f4. So usually the lines are not as ambitious for white, but nevertheless you have to be prepared, and even though the positions are less complicated, or perhaps there is less theory or complicated theory, you still have to know what to do against this move. Again, white setup is to play e3 and develop simply knight f3, bishop e2, or rook c1. So after bishop f4, we play bishop g7, white plays e3, and here we simply play castle. We want to delay capturing on c4 for as long as possible, and at the same time we want to prepare c5 attack in the center. So here white has several options. White can play rook c1, which is kind of wait and move, because he doesn't want to waste the tempo. If black takes, he wants to take in one go with the bishop. Another way is to develop the knight f3, and lastly, pawn takes d5. So let's look at c takes d first. Knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes, and here white picks up the free pawn. So, of course, black sacrificed this pawn, and now he plays knight a6. Notice that black really has a head start in development. White only has one piece which is developed. And so white now has to take the knight, because if he doesn't, he could easily get in trouble, because if he goes back with the bishop, now all of black's pieces are developed. Black can play bishop f5, rook c8, and just tremendous compensation and very active piece play. So white has to really take on a6, pawn takes, and this is one playable way. Of course, white can play knight f3 and be up a pawn, but nevertheless, black has compensation. But we believe actually that there is no reason for black to play down the pawn, because here black has a very nice intermezzo, queen takes g2, exclam. Notice that now the rook is hanging on h1, so white has nothing better than to go queen f3, and now we have this endgame. Queen takes f3, knight takes, pawn takes a6. So this is more or less forced variation after bishop takes c7. So let us take a look at this position. Black has a bishop pair, but a little bit damaged pawn structure with the pawns on a6, a7. White, on the other hand, has some light square weaknesses, especially the whole diagonal a8, g1. And so this probably is more than sufficient for black to get a good game. For example, if white tries to play normal rook c1, the best way for black to play this position is with the move f6. This is a very useful prophylactic move. Not only do we take control over the e5 square, we also prepare potentially bishop e6. Of course, we can also play bishop b7, but after king e2, it's not as easy for black to create any threats. So we're actually waiting for move king e2, because you're going to see later why it's important for black to keep the bishop on c8. So let's say king e2, and now very strong move a5. That's the whole point why we kept the bishop on c8, so the bishop can go to a6 in one go. And if white takes the pawn, then black already has a draw in his pocket. He can play bishop a6 check, let's say king goes somewhere, and then bishop b7. So this is a repetition that white cannot avoid, so black already has a draw. And if white doesn't play king e2, it's really hard to find the next move, because bishop b7 is coming up. Again, if king e2, then a5. And also bishop e6 is another useful move. So altogether, we can easily conclude that black is doing quite well on this line. So we took a look at the move c takes d, and now let's take a look at the move rook c1. So again, white is trying and waiting for black to take on c4, so that when bishop takes, white develops his bishop with one move. And also potentially the rook is going to attack the weak pawn on c7. So that's why we recommend a very simple and elegant way to defend the pawn on d5, the move c6. Of course, if now white takes on d5, black can either take with the knight, or even with the pawn, because knight b5 is nothing to be afraid of. We can simply play queen a5 check, and really there is no danger. So after c6, white plays knight f3. And now the move that we like is a simple developing move bishop e6, questioning white what to do with the pawn on c4. And if knight g5, now bishop f5, and if queen b3, very easy move, queen b6, offering the queen trade. Again, the position is quite closed. If queens are traded off and white takes on d5, black can take with the knight. And this is about even position. For example, knight takes, pawn takes, a3, knight c6, and neither side has an advantage. As a matter of fact, only black can try to play for a win with the move f6 and e5, but roughly even position. So we examined the moves c takes d and rook c1. Now let us take a look at the move knight f3. Of course, here black can try to play c6 with the same plan as the rook c1 variation, but we want to show you another possibility, which is actually one of the main lines after the move c5. So white takes the pawn, and this is more in the Gruenfeld style. Black is getting a lot of dynamic play for his pieces. Queen a5, rook c1, d takes c, bishop takes c4, and queen takes pawn. So the position is now more open. Bishop b3, knight c6, castle, and simple queen a5. So let's look at this position for a second and try to evaluate it. So there are no weaknesses for either side. White has a powerful bishop on b3, black has a strong bishop on g7. The rook can potentially go to d8. Really, in terms of weak squares or outposts, we're about even. Neither side controls the center. So with accurate play, the position should be about even. So let's take a look at some possible variation. For example, h3, preventing bishop g4, bishop f5, nevertheless, bishop is developed on a good square, queen a2, preparing rook f to d1. And now with this simplification move, knight e4, offering the knight trade, black achieves easy equality. For example, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook f d1, and now this simple move queen h5, and if rook d7, black has this easy move rook a to c8. Notice that taking the pawn is suicidal because knight d4 and both rooks are hanging. So this is really bad. And in this position, we can conclude the position is drawn. Now, if we go back and try to find an aggressive way for white to play for initiative, white can try to play knight d5. So this is, instead of knight takes knight, this move knight to d5. And this has been played by none other than Vladimir Kramnik against Gera Kamsky, the recent tournament. And Kamsky played quite well. He played e5, hitting the bishop. Kramnik played bishop h2. By the way, there is this well-known exchange sacrifice that is not considered by theory to give white advantage. It's after rook takes c6, pawn takes c6. And now knight e7 check, king h8, knight takes pawn, hitting the queen, queen b6, knight takes e5. So we quickly covered knight takes e4, and there is no problems for black whatsoever. But let's take a look at a more ambitious line, knight to d5. This has been played by several top GMs, and you have to be a little bit prepared for this move. So after knight to d5, black plays e5, and now white has two options. One is the exchange sacrifice, where black will get 2 pawns after pawn takes, knight e7, knight takes c6, queen b6, knight takes e5. And this is known in theory that black is doing quite well. And another move is, if we go back, and another move is simply bishop dropping back to h2, and again here black gets a good game. But first, let us take a look at this semi-forced line. Rook takes, pawn takes, knight e7 check, king h8, knight takes c6, getting the queen, knight takes, so queen b6, knight takes e5, and here black simply plays bishop to e6. So white has 2 pawns for the exchange, but normally, especially for this type of position, we have a lot of open files, the D and C files, where black rooks will play a key role. So the position is balanced. And after bishop takes e6, queen takes e6, we analyzed this position for many hours with Rybka, and Rybka actually agrees that it's about even and only black can try to play for advantage. If queen c2, then f5, and now we can follow up with g5 and try to get powerful attack, or get our rooks on open files, whereas the knights are a little bit misplaced, especially with the bishop on f4. There is no easy way for white to play this position. So we analyzed rook takes c6, and now let us focus on the move bishop h2. This was played by none other than Kramnik at a recent tournament against Gata Kamsky, and Kamsky actually played well and showed that black has sufficient play for at least equality here. So he played bishop e6, hitting the knight, rook f2 d1, rook f2 d8, and now Kramnik played this very interesting move, queen to c4. At first it looks like a dubious move because you put your queen right on the same diagonal as the bishop and you pin the knight on d5. On the other hand, the knight on e4 is attacked, and there is no easy square for this knight. So Kamsky played simply knight to f6. Kramnik defended with e4. And now the following rook a to c8 really illustrates that there is no advantage for white. Now the queen is again having some trouble on c4. And after knight g5, knight to d4, knight e7 check, king f8, knight takes e6 check, king takes e7. We have some tactics here, but they end up working quite nicely for black. Knight takes d8, rook takes c4, bishop takes c4. And here, white has two rooks for the queen, but black has this very powerful knight on d4. And really, we think that black has an excellent game. As a matter of fact, we found immediate improvement on Kamsky here. He played knight e8, but a more aggressive approach, knight takes e4, is actually quite nicely here, because if knight takes f7, we have this little quiet move, queen to b6. Notice that the pawn on f2 is getting weak, and if knight takes e5, trying to use the e-file tactics, because now the knight here on e4 is going to feel uncomfortable. Rook e1 is coming up. We have very nice play here. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5. And look how beautiful the queen works with the two knights. Knight f3 check, pawn takes, not the losing move king h1, because now white gets checkmated. This is a very beautiful checkmate. So white has to take, queen takes f2, king h1, and black forces perpetual after queen takes f3, and this is a dead draw. So once again, this illustrates that in the bishop f4 variation, especially after knight f3 c5, there could be some tactics, but if you're well prepared, you shouldn't face any problems at all. So far, we have covered all the lines where the bishop is developed, f4, g5, followed by e3. Now we're going to take a look at some of the less common setups for white, such as the move e3, or after knight f3, bishop g7, e3. Now again, this is not aiming at opening advantage. It's a rather passive line, but nevertheless, you should be prepared for this position. Now, besides this move, this setup, we also have to take a look at the less popular move, but playable after c takes d, knight takes bishop d2. And the idea here is to recapture on c3 with the bishop. And also we're going to cover the lines where white will actually try to fianchetto. Usually they take on d5 and then fianchetto with the bishop. So first, let's look at the move e3. Black simply castles. And again, white has several choices, but let us focus on the more popular move these days, the move b4. This is actually an interesting way to play against idea c5. And also white is trying to delay the development of his light square bishop in hope that again, after d takes c, he will be able to develop it in one move. But against this move b4, we have a very interesting idea that I was able to actually utilize in one of my games from the recent US Championship, where I beat a very strong Grandmaster Jacobian. And let me show you the idea. The move is c6, bishop b2. So white is finishing the queen side first, again delaying the f1, the bishop, light square bishop development. And now I played a5. And this is a very interesting idea. If white plays b5, I now play a4. Notice that I create the square for my queen, and I want to play a3 myself. So immediately putting pressure on white's position. So taking the pawn on a4 is possible, but this is simply a very nice position. That's why my opponent played bishop a3, trying to prevent pawn from going to a3. Well, if knight takes pawn, we have several good moves. One of them, we can play queen a5 check, knight c3, knight e4, and notice how all of black's pieces are playing well together. And after a4, bishop a3, I want to mention that idea c takes b, c takes b. I first played bishop g4. Jacobian played bishop b4. Of course, the main idea is to prevent queen a5. And here I played knight bd7, sacrificing the pawn on a4. And this is another very powerful sacrifice, because after knight takes, I have another sacrifice coming up, e5. Very, very strong idea. And it turns out that taking on f8 is not such a great move, because after, for example, bishop takes f8, I'm threatening to play bishop b4 or even queen a5, and white is having serious problems with his king. So that's why Jacobian played a better move, bishop e2, and after rook e8, again, black has very, very strong counterplay, and both Rybka and I like black's position. So we will actually cover this game in more detail in the instructive game section at the end of the DVD. So again, e3 is nothing to be worried about. Black has several good ways to counter it, and the system that I showed is actually quite good. Now let us take a look at a very offbeat line, but yet still you have to know what to do against it after c takes d, knight takes d5, bishop d2. This idea is gaining more popularity recently because of its surprise factor. But in reality, moves such as bishop d2, you cannot fight for a big opening advantage. Again, the idea is when white plays e4 and knight takes knight, white will be able to capture with the bishop. So that's why we play knight to b6, with the main idea is to use the bad placement of the d2 bishop. So white plays bishop g5, bishop g7, and e3. And here black immediately strikes to attack the center, c5. Pawn takes c5. And notice that in this particular position, it's okay to give up the dark square bishop, because we're really weakening up the pawns. Normally, dark square bishop in the Gruenfeld is a key asset, just like in King's Indian. But in this particular position, it's okay to give it up, because we go into the endgame where white has several weaknesses. Rook takes d1. And now, simple move, knight 6 to d7. The pawn on c6 is doomed, on c5 is doomed, and when it goes, these are real targets, and in the endgame, they could become critical problems for white. So if white plays knight e2, then after knight takes c5, black has no problems, so white really needs to create some kind of pressure and avoid losing the c5 pawn. So the correct move is bishop b5. But now black plays knight c6. Again, c5 is hanging. So rook d5, Now f6, hitting the bishop. Bishop f4, and black follows up by a very strong move a6. Notice that if bishop takes, pawn takes, rook retreats, c5 pawn is hanging. So that's why bishop a4. But now we have e6. So if white wants to fight for some advantage, he has to play rook d6. But yet, this move, knight takes, pawn, forces white to take on c6, pawn takes. And now this position is about even. For example, if white tries to be aggressive and win the pawn with rook takes c6, he could actually get in trouble. A better move would be to play knight e2 and hope for a draw or about even game. But let me show you what could happen after rook takes pawn. After rook takes pawn, bishop b7 puts a big problem into white's hands, because now when the rook takes the knight, bishop takes g2 and h1 rook is hanging. So this is a winning position for black. So that's why white has to be very careful and not to take the pawn on c6. So we have covered most of the variations. Now let's look at the lines where white fan shadows the bishop. The move order sometimes could vary. For example, white can take on d5 and play g3 here. White can play the same way, keeping the knight on g1. But basically, it transposes to this position after castle, bishop g2. The move that we recommend here is c5. Black also has knight b6, and if you would like to look more into this position, we believe that black has a great game. But after c5, this is the easiest and we think best way for equality. So white castles, knight takes knight, pawn takes, and here we play knight c6. Now white plays e3, and the move that we prefer here is bishop to e6, preparing potentially queen d7, bishop h3, and also taking control of the light squares d5 and c4. And after bishop a3, exchanging on d4, we simply play bishop to d5. Now this already shows that black is doing great. There are no problems. Potentially you can play rook e8 and e5. But if white tries to play queen d3 with idea e4, there is a very neat simplification idea. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes, and knight to e5. Notice that the queen is hanging on d3, pawn takes knight. So after queen a2, knight takes f3, queen takes f3, black simply plays queen d2, and this is dead even position. So this shows you that g3 lines are not a problem, especially when the knight is on d5 and black plays c5.
Now let's go to games played with some of the variations we analyzed. Of course, we cannot cover variation on every game, but I have a few games here. And the first game I want to bring, it's not exactly the way that we want to play this variation. But the reason I'm bringing this game, because this is one of the most typical game for Gruenfeld defense. That's a very powerful game and one of my most favorite games ever in chess, that was played by Garry Kasparov. And it was played in 1988, where we did not have powerful engines analyzing for us and giving us very good assessment of various variation. It was all over 20 years ago. And the game that played by Kasparov is very typical for Gruenfeld. And I ran this game into latest version of Ripka on a very powerful engine, and it agrees with almost everything that Black did. Game was full of innovations for that time, and one of the most memorable games played with Gruenfeld. d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, bishop g7, queen b3, that's the Russian variation, d takes c, queen takes c4, white exposes queen in early stage but gets good grip on the center, castle, e4, knight a6, bishop e2, c5, d5, and e6. e6 is one of the moves that Black can be played in this position. Actually, in this position, what we recommend is not knight a6, because there was a lot of theory. We're going up and down. We gave you the easiest way to play against this variation, but this we will see just how interesting this may develop. Just typical play for Black in Gruenfeld. Bishop e2, c5, d5, e6, bishop g5, ed, knight takes d5, bishop e6, castle. This variation was, I remember, was very carefully prepared for by Belyavsky, who was very competitive in the openings, and it was novelty, but novelty was for everyone but Kasparov. Kasparov, any novelty that you play against him is not novelty for him at that point. So bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, queen b6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and e5. White's idea is to organize very quick attack on Black's king. There is a possible queen e6, queen e7, queen f5 was chosen by Kasparov. After bishop d3, queen c8, and in this position White played very ambitious move, rook d1, so they're very well placed in its center. They control the d file, and they have potential very quick attack on Black's king. So Black cannot be defending this position. Their counterplay based entirely, their chance based entirely on counterplay. So they played in this position b5. Well, on queen takes b5, there is knight c7, queen h4, knight b4, and I'm sure this was predicted by Belyavsky, who played here. He could have played the rook d6 but then black goes c4 with potential c3 with a very good play. But bishop takes g6 was played. This is highly ambitious. Black cannot take with h-pawn because of knight g5, and on rook e8, rook d7, white simply wins. F takes g, and now rook d7. This looks very, well, actually knight is on f3 in this position. F takes g, rook d7. This is very, very dangerous position for black. There is knight g5 threat with potential rook takes g7. You know, there is e6, e7 threat. So black has to be very precise. And here, every move that Kasparov played in '88, which was over 20 years ago, and very powerful hardware with a Ribka on it, made absolutely the same absolute perfect moves. Queen e8, Queen e8, rook e7. Queen e8 move stops knight g5, h6 because there is no knight e6. And rook e7 looks very dangerous because now white wants to play rook d to d7. But that was all very well calculated by Kasparov. I don't know whether it was calculated over the board or it was calculated at home before the game. I would think it was home preparation. And after rook e7, bishop h6. That's the winning move. Now, queen takes h6 will be met, but queen takes rook. So king b1 practically is the only answer. And here comes absolutely mind-blowing rook d8. And this is a win. And taking queen will be checkmate, is out of question. The rook d6 move was played. That's the only way to keep the d-file closed. And now queen c6. That's another very powerful answer. Queen is absolutely immune because of rook d1 checkmate. Bishop is immune because queen e4 followed by the smothered mate, very well known for everyone. So what to do here? After queen c6, actually the game is practically over. a3 was played. The white is totally helpless. Rook takes d6, ed, queen takes d6, a takes b, c takes b, queen e4, b3, and black won in couple of moves after knight d4. There was rook f4, and on queen a8, bishop f8. All white's pieces are hanging, and king is in a grave danger, so white resigned. In my opinion, this is very powerful game, very well played. And that's the danger of Gruenfeld. When you play Gruenfeld, if you want this type of positions, now, we recommend this and that variation to play in Gruenfeld. You don't have to pick every one of the variations that we recommend. You can find your own, but believe me, it's going to help you understanding of chess, in understanding of dynamics, and in a power play in a lot of positions, and it will help in general your chess. Now, I want to show you game played not too long ago, just practically a few months ago, between Kramnik and Ivanchuk. Names need no introduction. And the reason, well, this was a semi-blitz game, quick game, but the semi-blitz game played with those players, games maybe more powerful and more accurate than games played in some grandmasters in the regular tournament game. Those are two super grandmasters playing each other. D4, Kramnik is white and Ivanchuk is black. Knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop f4, castle, e3, c5. D takes c, queen a5, rook c1, d takes c, bishop takes c4, queen takes c5. This is all theory. I'm sure they spent few seconds to reach this position. Knight c6, castle, queen a5, h3, stopping bishop g4. And here, normal move, theoretical move is bishop f5 with approximate equality, maybe slightly better for white. Ivanchuk made a new move. It's an interesting move. On bishop f5, white would play queen e2, so Ivanchuk played queen a6 move. It's interesting, kind of preventing queen e2 or wanting to exchange queens after that. Queen c2 maybe is not that good. So after queen a6, in this position, which I think is the novelty, white played e4, preventing bishop f5. Rook d8, queen e1, knight b4, obviously intending the fork, knight e5, bishop e6, knight a4, bishop takes b3, a takes b, knight d3, knight takes d3, queen takes d3. Now, let's talk about this position. The opening results are clearly in black's favor. White has double pawns. Black achieved exchanging couple of minor pieces. So, and they have, after knight c5, they have nice outpost on b5 thanks to double b pawns, and black has some advantage here. e5 was played, knight d5, bishop g5, rook a to c8. At this point, I think black has big advantage. Rook a c8, b4, h6, obviously taking on b4 will drop the e7 pawn, so h6 needs to be played first, and e6 for white. Black didn't take the bishop because after ef with the potential queen e6 there is some counterplay, and notice this is semi-blitz game. f5 was played, bishop d2, and a5. Now the nice white's knight is a little shaky on c5, and after a5 white is practically lost. knight d7, a takes b, knight e5, rook takes c1, bishop takes c1, king h7, knight f7, rook c8, queen d2, attacking h6 pawn, but this pawn is worthless, so b3 was played, and after b3, rook d1, rook c2. Black is absolutely dominating white. If white takes on d5, after exchanging queens, bishop drops on c1, and white will be totally lost. After rook c2, queen e1, queen c6. This was already obviously time pressure. They started with time pressure. Bishop takes h6, bishop takes h6, and out of desperation, white played queen e5, threatening mate and attacking knight on d5. Knight f6 was played, rook d8, and here small combination and cute combination that practically ends the game. Rook c1 check, king h2, rook h1 check, and there is no defense here. On king g3 there is knight h5 with all kinds of mating threats. So, and king takes h1, queen c1 check, king h2, bishop f4 check, winning the queen and the game. And in this position, a white resigned. This is the type of position that you should resign even in a blitz game. So now I want to show you one of the most powerful performances in Gruenfeld recently, practically played a couple of months ago. This was between two young and top players. They are both in top 10 today in the world. It's between Alexander Moisenko. It's a new name in chess, well, relatively new, and he is one of the top players in the world today, and Peter Svidler. One of the very interesting variations of Gruenfeld, d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5. We covered this in the theoretical part of this DVD. Bishop g5, knight e4, bishop h4, knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, d takes c, e3, bishop e6, knight f3, bishop g7, rook b1, this is all theory, b6, and here knight d2 was played, attacking c4 pawn, castle. And white played bishop e2. Why not bishop takes c4 or knight takes c4? If knight takes c4, well, what did white do? Played 1, 2, 3 moves with the knight to get the pawn back that they sacrificed a while ago. Black after c5 and knight c6 should have good game. Taking with the bishop, it's even worse because bishop takes, knight takes, and after queen d5 with double attack on the knight and g2, white may be losing some material, because on queen f3 I think queen takes c4 and sacrificing rook, and taking on c3 will be very, very dangerous for white. So white didn't take on c4 and played quiet bishop e2. c5, bishop f3, and here Svidler made c takes d. And in the, the most interesting position and exciting position after c takes d was not displayed on the board. After spending a lot of time on the clock, white played c takes d. Now, what would have happened after bishop takes a8? I tell you what would have happened. Then d takes c. With the best play for both players, black gets extremely powerful compensation. They sacrifice a lot of material. Knight f3 and queen d3. Now that threatens c2. If queens are exchanged, those pawns are very, very dangerous, and it's practically no good answer. On rook c1, knight a6, attacking this bishop on a8, and after knight c6, knight a6, bishop b7, knight c5, bishop takes e7, and knight takes b7, bishop f8, king f8. Just let's take a look at this position. White is up 2 exchanges, but has every reason to be totally depressed in this position. So this is, in my opinion, very difficult position for white. Well, of course, players on this level, they are afraid of those positions more, to getting to these positions, good players, than weaker players. They are afraid more because they understand that position better and they know the dangers. So white simply played c takes d. Knight d7, bishop takes a8, queen takes a8, white castle, and black played c3. Let's look at this position. Black played c3, but what to do for white here? Actually, a couple of moves earlier, even before bishop takes a8, it seems like interesting idea, d5. But d5, bishop f5, and now e4. Is white simply trapping black's bishop? No, because c3 will be played, and after knight b3, rook c8, notice that white cannot win black's bishop under no circumstances, because black can always play g5, attacking white's bishop, and prepare the escape square. But rook c8 creates greater threat, and if rook c1, maybe even rook c4, attacking the pawn, and if white takes black's bishop, black is going to take bishop on h4, and if in this position queen c2, then g5 can be played with a very bad position for white. So white decided to take the rook. Queen takes a8, castle, Now taking on C, well, bishop is on e6. Taking on c4 is not possible. Bishop protecting, castling, and after c3, knight f3, rook c8, queen a4, knight f6. Black has tremendous compensation. They have very powerful pawn, they have two bishops, and they have material deficit very minimal. What happened after knight f6, rook fc1, knight d5, queen c2, a5, preparing knight b4, a3, queen a6, bishop g3, bishop h6. You see it moved before on e4. Black would have played knight f4. Now when white stops it, black plays bishop h6, again preventing e4. Rook e1, b5, now b4 is coming. e4 and b4. And that's the winning move in this position. E takes d gives white absolutely lost position after bishop f5, and on queen b3 black simply takes the rook followed by c2, and white is hopeless. So white played knight e5, not taking the knight on d5. And now after knight e5, bishop to d2, and after bishop d2, rook e d1 is possible. And actually this position is totally hopeless already for white. And the game continued like several more moves, and black won the game. You can see this game in the database. It was played in 2008, just in April of 2008, and black simply won the game quickly. And the last game I want to show you actually was very, very interesting and very, very powerful. This game was played by my student and one of the co-authors of this DVD, Eugene Perelstein, against another American Grandmaster, Akobian. This was very typical for Gruenfeld. The power counterplay and activity. Well, that's the basic ingredient of this game. d4, knight f6. It's a different variation on Gruenfeld. g6, knight c3, d5. Actually, when we're talking about these power plays, I have not seen so many instant attacks conducted by black in any other opening than in Gruenfeld. So, knight f3, bishop g7, e3, castle, and now b4. This is one of the ways white can play. The idea is to expand on a queen side and later castle and have superiorities on the queen side. b4, c6, bishop b2, a5, b5, 4. This is very, very good move. This is positional sacrifice of a pawn. After knight takes, queen a5 can be played. And on knight c3, knight e4. This is very good counterplay for black. And on queen b3, bishop e6. You can analyze this position. I ran this position through Ripka, and truthfully, it's very difficult to play for black, this position, for white. After a4, bishop a3 was played, stopping a3, and on bishop a3, c takes b, c takes b, bishop g4, bishop b4, knight bd7, and bishop e2 had to be played. And greed by playing knight takes a4 is very, very dangerous. e5, very powerful move, actually can be played on the highest level. This is the move played by Eugene that Ripka admires a lot. On bishop takes f8, bishop will take on f8, and there's all kinds of threats. White has great difficulties meeting. So what happened after e5, bishop e2, rook e8, d takes e, knight takes e5, and knight c5. Well, if white plays knight takes e5, black simply plays bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and rook takes e4 with very, very good position. So what white did in this position, actually they simply played knight c5. Then knight takes f3, gf, and bishop h3. Very, very difficult position for white. Knight takes b7 is not good because queen c7, knight c5, bishop g2, and on rook g1 there is queen takes h2, and the position is real bad for white. And of course white realized here that taking too many pawns may end up very gravely. So in this position, white played bishop c3, controlling d4, and they try to stabilize the position. After bishop c3, b6, and here white had to go knight on a4, although knight stands very badly on a4, very badly and very dangerous position. But natural move is knight b3, which allows very powerful bone crushing tactics. Rook takes e3, and now there is no defense. F takes e will be met by knight e4 with two devastating threats: bishop takes c3 and queen h4 check, followed by mate. So there would be no defense. After rook takes c3, bishop d4 was played. Now simply rook e8, and you can see that white is totally ruined. Rook g1, knight h5, knight f4 is coming, and so is the end of the game. After knight h5, queen d2, rook a4, putting pressure on d4, and after exchange reinstating knight f4 threat. Castle long, queen c8 check, king b1, bishop f5 check, king a1, and now simply queen c2 ends the game, because threatening rook takes on mate. On queen takes c2, simply bishop takes c2, rook is hanging, knight is hanging, and the bishop is hanging. So there is no defense, and white resigned. Very powerful game. So what we learned that you get very dynamic play, very dynamic counterplay. Now, for those who are interested improving in chess, I think you should take Gruenfeld as your weapon, or at least look at a lot of games played in Gruenfeld. You will see real active piece movement, and that's today's chess. So enjoy Gruenfeld, play Gruenfeld, and learn a lot from it.